My name is Maya Carter, and I live in the United States of America. This story is mine, told in my own words because only I know how it really felt. People often imagine birthdays as joyful occasions filled with warmth, laughter, and family support. Mine, however, became the turning point of my life. The night everything I had silently carried for years cracked open. The night I learned that even love can sometimes feel like betrayal. It happened in Cleveland, Ohio, in the old brick house where I had grown up. The house had peeling paint on the porch, squeaky floorboards in the hallway, and the smell of my mother's candles, cheap lavender mixed with vanilla, that never seemed to fade. It was supposed to be a simple birthday gathering. A few balloons taped to the walls, a small cake bought from the grocery store, and some cousins sitting in the living room pretending to be cheerful. I wasn't expecting a grand celebration. I never did. But I had hoped, in some quiet part of me, that the evening might carry some hint of affection or recognition. After all, I had given so much of myself to this family, even though they never knew it. The party was barely underway when my brother Ethan cornered me near the kitchen. He had always been demanding, always sure that my money and time belonged to him. He lowered his voice and asked for my ATM card again. Just for a day, he said, as if that made it less invasive. I knew the pattern. One day would stretch into a week, then into overdraft fees, and eventually, I would be left fixing the mess. I told him no. I told him calmly, firmly, that I was not giving him my card this time. That single word, no, set everything aflame. His eyes flashed with anger. "You're selfish," he spat. Before I could even react, he reached out and grabbed my dress, the one I had bought with my own earnings for that night, a simple but elegant piece that made me feel confident. His hand pulled at the fabric, tearing the shoulder seam. The sound of the rip was louder in my ears than the chatter of relatives, louder than the cheap music playing from the Bluetooth speaker. In that instant, it felt like he had torn not just my dress, but the thin veil of dignity I had been trying to hold together for years. The room fell silent. Everyone saw. I expected my parents, Linda and Mark, to step in, to scold him, to defend me. But when they rushed over, their faces were twisted not with concern for me, but with irritation that I had caused a scene. My father's voice boomed over the hush. "You're not one of us anymore. Get out." My mother's silence cut deeper than his words. She looked away, as if ashamed of me instead of what had been done to me. I stood there, frozen, with torn fabric hanging from my shoulder and tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I had no words left. For years, I had sacrificed everything for them. They didn't know, no one in that room knew, that I had been paying almost all of their expenses. The electricity bill, my credit card, the car insurance, direct deposits from my account. Every month for 2 years, I had been sending them $2,400 quietly, without complaint, without asking for thanks. When my father's hospital stay left them drowning in debt, I covered $6,800 in medical bills. They never once asked how I managed, never once acknowledged it. They simply took, and I gave because I thought love meant keeping their burdens off their shoulders. Standing in that living room, hearing my father disown me as if I were nothing, I realized the truth. They had never seen me. They only saw what I provided. And the moment I said no, the moment I set a boundary, I was disposable. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply turned, holding the torn fabric tight across my chest, and walked out of that house. My heels clicked against the wooden porch steps, and I swore the sound echoed into the night like a drumbeat of freedom. I got into my car, a silver sedan I had bought myself, and I drove away. Behind me, the lights of the house blurred in my rearview mirror until they were nothing but a faint glow, like a dying star. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. I drove through the night, past gas stations, past sleeping towns, past fields silvered by moonlight. With every mile I put between myself and that house, I felt the weight of years slipping off my shoulders. I was leaving behind not just a party, not just a torn dress, but a life where my love was mistaken for obligation and my silence mistaken for weakness. By sunrise, I had reached Miami, Florida. The city rose around me like a promise, the ocean shimmering on the horizon. I pulled into the driveway of my villa, a place I had kept secret, even from my closest family. White walls gleamed in the morning light, tall windows caught the gold of the sun, and the pool reflected the sky like a mirror. I had bought it the year before for $850,000, paid in full from the business I had built with my own hands. It was my sanctuary, my proof that I was not just a source of money for others, but a woman capable of building her own empire. As I stepped inside, the cool air wrapped around me like a balm. I set down my torn dress on a chair and looked around the spacious living room with its pale furniture and soft rugs. This was mine, not theirs, not anyone else's. Every tile, every beam, every inch of it was proof of my work, my vision, my resilience. I breathed deeply, the salt air drifting in from the balcony, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. I knew my parents would be shocked when they realized what I had been hiding. I knew Ethan would fume when he discovered that the sister he had mocked and torn down was not dependent on him, but thriving without him. I also knew they would eventually come looking, desperate for the support they had once taken for granted. But in that moment, standing in the quiet of my villa with the ocean calling beyond the windows, I made a decision. My life was mine now. My love, my money, my future. I would no longer give them away to people who treated me as less than human. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the waves outside, I thought of the word my father had used, selfish. He had meant it as an insult, but for the first time, I let it roll through my mind without pain. Maybe being selfish wasn't a curse. Maybe it was survival. Maybe it was freedom. And so, with the sound of the sea filling my room, I closed my eyes and let myself rest, knowing that my story had only just begun. The morning after the party, I woke in my villa to the sound of seagulls crying above the ocean and the faint rush of waves in the distance. The sunlight spilled across the marble floors, catching in golden lines that stretched into the corners of the living room. For a moment, I lay still, the events of the night before running through my mind like a painful film, the torn dress, my brother's angry face, my father's words. But then I remembered where I was, not in Cleveland, not in that old brick house filled with resentment, but in my own sanctuary. Here, the air was lighter, fresher. Here, I could breathe without waiting for the next demand or insult. I made coffee and carried it onto the wide patio that overlooked the pool. The columns of the villa gleamed white against the sky, and the water in the pool was still, reflecting the pale blue of morning. I sat down, wrapped my robe tighter around me, and opened my laptop. The moment felt almost ceremonial, like I was about to perform the most important ritual of my life, severing every financial chain that tied me back to my family. For years, I had been the invisible backbone of their comfort. My parents had never stopped to ask how bills were magically covered, how repairs got paid, how vacations suddenly became possible. They didn't know about the nights I stayed up late, combing through balance sheets and spreadsheets, making sure that their debts were handled quietly. They had lived in ignorance, and I had let them because I thought love required sacrifice. But sacrifice without acknowledgement is slavery, and I was done being shackled. The first thing I did was pull up the banking portal. It was strange, seeing my parents' accounts listed there, like foreign lands I had once owned but never truly belonged to. Their electricity and gas bills had been linked to my credit card. I removed them. I opened the autopay section and canceled the monthly transfers of $2,400 that had been bleeding from my account like clockwork. Then I called the bank itself, pressing through the maze of automated menus until I reached a human voice. Calmly, almost coldly, I asked to have all secondary cards attached to my name closed. Ethan's card, my mother's backup card, even my father's emergency card. All of them canceled with a few typed commands and a final confirmation. I reset the online banking passwords, reclaiming the accounts that had been used without gratitude. It was like cutting cords with sharp scissors, snip, 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 until finally I felt the weight drop away. My hands trembled when I logged out, not from guilt, but from a deep rush of freedom. When I leaned back in my chair, I caught sight of the ocean just beyond the edge of the property. It was endless, stretching out in shimmering blues and greens, and I realized I felt just like that horizon, vast, unclaimed, finally my own. I picked up my phone and texted my closest friend, Rebecca, who lived in downtown Miami. "I'm safe," I wrote simply. She had been the only one who knew pieces of what I was going through, though I had never told her the full truth. The reply came quickly. "Good. Breathe. Your life, your rules." Her words anchored me. My life, my rules. I whispered it to myself as I stood, walking barefoot through the villa. The house was more than just a home. It was a reflection of everything I had built. In the West Wing, I had an office where rows of neatly stacked boxes sat waiting to be shipped, the latest designs from Sunlight and Company, my gift box business. The studio held shelves of candles, custom teas, small journals, and silk ribbons. My dressing room sparkled with clothes I had chosen for myself, not hand-me-downs or guilt-induced purchases. Every corner of this villa was infused with the quiet pride of independence. My business had started humbly at a kitchen table in Cleveland. I had scraped together a few $100s to order bulk candles and notebooks, assembling little boxes for friends. What began as a side hustle had grown into something far larger than even I had imagined. Now, Sunlight and Company ships across the United States and into Europe. A corporate client in New York City ordered monthly care packages for new hires, contracts worth $18,000 a month. A boutique in Seattle stocked our luxury candles and paid invoices promptly every week. A lifestyle store in Denver reordered seasonal boxes faster than I could design them. Just last quarter, a partner in London sent a payment of £20,000 for a holiday run of curated boxes, which sold out within a week. My family had no idea. To them, I was just their daughter, their sister, the one they could guilt, control, and use. They never thought to ask where my money came from. They assumed I worked some small job, or maybe they didn't think about it at all. But the truth was that my business had grown into something powerful, something that gave me not just wealth, but freedom. Walking past the shelves of merchandise, I touched one of the boxes, a pastel package tied with golden ribbon. It was beautiful. I had built this beauty with my own hands. I thought again of the night before, of Ethan's hand ripping my dress and my father's cold dismissal. They had thrown me out without hesitation, blind to the truth that I had been the one carrying them all along. Now, with every canceled card and closed account, they would finally know. They would wake up and find themselves without the safety net they had taken for granted. Their ATMs would decline, their credit lines would be frozen, and their bills would pile up. For once, they would taste the emptiness I had kept from them. And I did not feel guilty. As the sun rose higher, flooding the villa with golden light, I let myself walk outside to the pool. I slipped my robe off my shoulders and sat on the edge, dipping my toes into the cool water. The ocean wind carried the scent of salt and freedom. For the first time in years, my body felt light, unchained. I thought of calling Rebecca and inviting her over, but instead I let myself enjoy the solitude. This was a moment I needed to witness alone. The moment when I chose myself. I had cut the lines. I had severed every tie of money and silence that kept me bound to a family that saw me as nothing more than a wallet. They would come looking, I knew. They would try to apologize, try to crawl back into my good Rebecca's once they realized the truth. But as I sat in the Miami sun, sipping the last of my coffee, I knew one thing clearly. This was the beginning of my own life. A life I would no longer compromise for anyone, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. By noon, my phone was a storm of calls. It began with my mother, then my father, then Ethan, then numbers I didn't recognize. The screen lit up again and again, vibrating against the marble counter, like it was trying to crawl into my attention. I let every single one go unanswered. The sound was irritating at first, then almost comical. After everything they had done, after throwing me out, they suddenly couldn't live a single day without me. Rebecca must have sensed my turmoil. She texted me a photo of the ocean near her apartment downtown, sunlight scattering across the water like coins of silver. Her message was simple: let the tides speak. I laughed out loud, a raw sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long while. The The tide did speak. It said nothing lasts forever, not even their grip on me. That afternoon, just as I was beginning to feel the serenity of silence, the intercom buzzed. My security guard's voice came through, steady but cautious. "Miss Carter, there are 3 people at the gate asking for you." I froze. 3 people. I didn't need him to say their names, I knew. I walked to the monitor and pressed the camera feed. There they were, my family. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched, her face drawn and pale. My father stood stiff, his jaw clenched in that same way he always did when he thought he was right, when he thought authority alone was enough to bend others. And Ethan, my brother, looked down at his shoes, shifting from one foot to the other, not quite brave enough to meet the camera. They had found me. They knew now. The guard spoke again. "Should I send them away, ma'am?" His voice carried no judgment, only readiness to follow my orders. The thought startled me. I had never truly had power before, not the kind that came with someone asking permission to let my family into my space. I told him to wait. I stood for a long moment, staring at the screen. My mind replayed every hurt, the sound of fabric tearing, the venom in Ethan's voice, my father's words casting me out like I was nothing. But then came the memories of the quiet sacrifices, the $10,000 I had wired once for an emergency home repair, the countless $2,400 transfers, the credit card bills I had shouldered alone. They had never thanked me. They had never even asked how I managed. They had only taken. I walked through the villa, the lemony scent of polished wood following me. The place still felt new, like a dream I was only beginning to believe belonged to me. At the front door, I paused. I unlocked only the inner door, the one with the glass. Sunlight streamed through, illuminating their faces. They stood on the wide steps, exactly as I had seen them in the camera. My mother's eyes filled with tears when she saw me. "Maya," she whispered, "we didn't know. We didn't know you were paying for us." Her voice cracked. For a heartbeat, I almost believed it. Almost. "You didn't ask," I said, my own voice steady, sharper than I expected. "And you hurt me." My father stepped forward, his expression firm, though I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. "We made a mistake," he admitted, his tone measured. "But we're family. Family forgives. We need to talk, fix this. Right now, we're short on money. Just this week, we need about $1,200 to cover bills. After that, we'll figure things out." The words landed like stones in my chest. He wasn't here because he loved me. He wasn't here because he had suddenly understood my pain. He was here because his cards had stopped working, because the accounts were frozen, because for the first time in years, he didn't have me as a silent safety net. I remembered sitting in my old bedroom at 2 a.m, transferring $10,000 to cover the cracked roof and broken heater in winter, so my family wouldn't freeze. I remembered their laughter the next morning, as if nothing had ever been wrong, as if their world hadn't been on the verge of collapse. They had never even looked at me, never asked how the problem disappeared. I took in their faces now, my mother's sorrowful eyes, my father's desperate mask of authority, Ethan's downcast gaze, and I realized something profound. They weren't broken because they had lost me. They were broken because they had lost my money. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and uneven. "I'm sorry," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "I shouldn't have. I didn't mean to tear your dress. I was just angry. Please don't shut us out." But I remembered too clearly. His grip, the fabric ripping, his words selfish. He hadn't said it in the heat of a single argument. He had meant it. And now his apology came only when his access to my bank account was gone. I held their gaze through the glass. "I've already shut you out," I said. "And I'm not opening this door." Silence fell. My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's expression hardened, a storm brewing in his eyes. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Please," my mother tried again, her voice breaking. "We're sorry. We'll do better. Just let us in." I shook my head. "When I needed you, you turned me away. When I was hurt, you told me I didn't belong. Now you're here because the money stopped, not because you finally see me. That's not love. That's desperation. My father's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of reality sinking in. He opened his mouth to speak, but then stopped, perhaps realizing nothing he could say would pierce the glass between us. I reached for the lock and closed the door fully, the click echoing like a final sentence. Their faces blurred behind the glass, distorted by sunlight and my own resolve. I turned the key, sealing the barrier not just physically, but emotionally. From the window upstairs, I later saw them walking away. My mother leaned into my father's side, her tears streaking down her face. Ethan trailed behind, his shoulders heavy. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. I knew they would keep trying. They would call, maybe write, maybe even return to the gate again. But something had shifted inside me. The line had been drawn, and I had finally chosen myself over them. That night, as I lay in bed, the villa silent around me, I thought of everything that had just happened. The knock at the gate had been more than a family visit. It had been a test of my strength, my independence, my right to say no. And I had passed. The tide spoke again in my dreams, rolling in with whispers of freedom. This time, I didn't resist. When I closed that glass door, I knew I had chosen a side, my own. For years, I had stood on the line, stretching myself thin to cover their needs while hiding my own. But that lock clicking into place wasn't just a sound. It was a statement. My future no longer belonged to people who had discarded me so easily. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass for a long moment. Outside, I could still hear the faint shuffle of their footsteps leaving the porch, my father's low voice, my mother's soft sobs, Ethan's silence. The guard called to tell me they were gone, but I already knew. Their absence left behind a strange mixture inside me. Sadness, yes, but also a freedom so sharp it felt almost holy. That evening, I needed air and the company of someone who saw me. So, I met Rebecca at a small restaurant near the bay. The lights shimmered on the water as we sat at a corner table. We split a simple dinner, salad, fries, 2 glasses of wine, and I paid $38, leaving a $12 tip because kindness matters, even to strangers. Rebecca listened quietly as I told her about the confrontation at my gate. She didn't interrupt or rush to offer empty comfort. She just listened, her hand resting over mine when my voice trembled. That was more valuable than any apology my family could ever give. After dinner, we spoke of brighter things. Sunlight and company had more opportunities blooming than I had time to count. A hotel chain in Chicago was considering our welcome boxes for their executive suites, a contract worth $120,000 a year. We had a pitch scheduled with a tech company in Austin next week, and if it went well, we'd double our quarterly earnings. Across the Atlantic, a holiday box designed for clients in Europe promised a potential £75,000 in sales. Rebecca's eyes lit up as we sketched ideas on napkins, laughing as though we were girls again, dreaming without limits. When I drove home, the streets of Miami sparkled with neon and possibility. My villa welcomed me back with quiet, the kind of silence that feels like safety, not loneliness. I walked through each room slowly, touching the surfaces, taking in the clean air, the view of the ocean. Finally, I went to my closet. On a hook by the wall, I hung the torn dress. Its seam was ripped, its shoulder broken, but I kept it not as a reminder of shame. It was a symbol of the line I had drawn, a line I would never cross again. As I stood there, I thought about everything I had endured in that Cleveland house. The whispered demands, the weight of being their invisible provider, the loneliness of giving without acknowledgement. I thought about the younger version of myself who had stayed silent, afraid to be called selfish. That girl had finally grown into someone else, someone who understood that saying no could be the most loving act of all. I stepped outside to the patio, the moonlight shimmering across the pool. The night was quiet except for the soft roll of waves in the distance. I breathed deeply, tasting salt on the air, and I felt steady in a way I hadn't before. My family might come back, they might call again, they might beg or curse or try to manipulate, but none of it mattered. I had built something that could not be undone. My independence, my business, my home, my peace. I whispered the words aloud just to hear them. This is my life. I built it. I paid for it. I decide who walks through my door. And as I turned toward the quiet villa, my heart lighter than it had been in years, I knew one final truth. I owed them nothing. Not anymore. That night, I slept deeply, wrapped not in fear or guilt, but in peace.